Good evening, and welcome to this extended special report. In the next 30 minutes, we will explore a complex and highly discussed topic involving Minnesota's recent welfare fraud investigations, the political conflict between Representative Ilhan Omar and former President Donald Trump, and the broader public debate that has unfolded around these events. Our goal is to present the facts clearly while explaining the claims, responses, and questions that have emerged. This story has grown beyond individual criminal cases and has become intertwined with immigration issues, national security concerns, political rhetoric, and online commentary. To understand the controversy, we must start with the core allegations. Over the past several years, Minnesota has faced multiple fraud investigations across different social service programs. These include the Feeding Our Future Meal program, Medicaid-funded autism services, and housing stabilization services. Collectively, these programs saw explosive financial growth, which triggered scrutiny from state and federal authorities. Some online commentators and political figures have claimed that individuals within the Somali-American community played key roles in these fraud schemes. In addition, some commentators have made a dramatic claim that money obtained through fraud may have been sent overseas and possibly reached Al-Shabaab, an extremist group in East Africa. This allegation has been repeatedly challenged and remains unverified by any public official source. Nevertheless, it has stirred strong political reactions. Representative Ilhan Omar, who was born in Somalia and represents Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, responded forcefully to these claims. She accused her critics, particularly former President Trump, of spreading misinformation and unfairly targeting Somali immigrants. Trump, in return, accused Somali immigrants of ripping off the country and suggested that the United States should no longer accept refugees from Somalia. These exchanges intensified the national conversation. Supporters of Trump argue that he is raising legitimate concerns about fraud and national security. Supporters of Omar argue that she is pushing back against harmful stereotypes, xenophobia, and political opportunism. In this program, we will walk through the allegations, the political responses, the ongoing investigations, the community perspectives, and what is known versus what remains unclear. By the end of this report, you will have a comprehensive and balanced understanding of the situation. After the allegations gained attention online, a video surfaced of Representative Ilhan Omar addressing her supporters. In the clip, Omar strongly rejected the claim that Somali immigrants were involved in funneling taxpayer money to terrorism. She stated that the accusations being spread online were lies and politically motivated attempts to discredit her and the Somali-American community. Omar emphasized that America should never blame an entire community for the actions of a few individuals. She argued that such generalizations lead to ignorance and damage the country's reputation. She referenced past examples where she believes misinformation was treated as fact, including a false narrative about Asian Americans used during political campaigns. According to Omar, these kinds of claims make the United States appear foolish on the world stage. Her comments were delivered with urgency, and some observers described her tone as defensive or emotional. Her supporters, however, viewed it as a necessary pushback against what they saw as unjust accusations. Shortly after Omar's speech circulated, former President Trump was asked by a reporter about the situation. The reporter questioned what Somali immigrants had to do with a separate fraud case involving an Afghan individual. Trump responded by saying Somali immigrants were ripping us off for a lot of money, and questioned why the United States sends any financial assistance to Somalia. He also repeated a broader claim that Somali refugees cause problems and should not be accepted into the United States. Trump took his comments further by stating that America is getting a lot of their people out, suggesting potential deportation or immigration enforcement actions. These comments energized his supporters but alarmed immigrant communities and civil rights organizations. The political clash between Omar and Trump is not new, but this specific situation intensified their long-running rivalry. Omar argued that Trump's statements encourage hatred and division, Trump and his supporters argued that Omar refuses to acknowledge wrongdoing in her community and uses accusations of racism to deflect criticism. This verbal battle played out across social media platforms, campaign rallies, and news outlets, drawing national attention. It marked the beginning of a much broader conversation about fraud, immigration, and national identity. To understand the situation clearly, we must examine what investigators and official reports have actually confirmed. Minnesota has indeed undergone several major fraud investigations involving social service programs. These investigations are real, ongoing, and have already resulted in numerous charges. The most widely known case is the Feeding Our Future scandal. More than 70 individuals have been charged in a federal investigation into fraudulent meal claims intended for low-income children. Prosecutors allege that the defendants stole more than $300 million by claiming to serve meals that were never provided. Some of these individuals were members of the Somali-American community, though many others were not. Another case involves Housing Stabilization Services, a Medicaid program designed to help seniors, individuals with disabilities, and people struggling with homelessness. Officials reported that spending on this program skyrocketed from $2.6 million in 2020 to more than $120 million in 2024. Investigators say loose eligibility rules made the program vulnerable, and several individuals have been accused of submitting fraudulent claims. A third major case involves autism services. Reports indicate that autism-related Medicaid billing exploded from just $3 million in 2018 to $400 million by 2023. Some providers allegedly recruited families and encouraged them to obtain unnecessary or false autism diagnoses for their children. These diagnoses allowed providers to bill Medicaid for costly therapy packages. Authorities have charged several individuals connected to these schemes. Some defendants are Somali-American, which has fueled political rhetoric. However, investigators have never stated that the Somali community as a whole is responsible for these crimes. The fraud itself is real and significant, but the interpretation of that fraud has become deeply politicized. Some commentators describe the situation as evidence of systematic exploitation by immigrant groups. Others argue that the fraud cases involve individuals acting independently and should not be used to stigmatize entire communities. What is clear is that these cases have shaken public trust in Minnesota's social service programs and raised concerns about oversight, regulation, and financial accountability. State officials have responded by tightening rules and conducting additional audits to prevent future abuses. One of the most sensitive and controversial elements of this story involves money transfers, specifically remittances sent from Somali-American families in the United States to relatives in Somalia. Remittances are a common practice across many immigrant communities. Millions of families around the world rely on money sent from relatives abroad. For Somalia, remittances are especially significant. It is estimated that around 40% of Somali households receive money from overseas, and the total annual amount of remittances may exceed the Somali government's entire national budget. Most remittances flow through informal networks known as hawala systems. These systems are widely used in countries where formal banking institutions are limited or unreliable. Hawala transfers are not inherently illegal, but they operate on trust rather than digital records, which can create opportunities for misuse. Some commentators claim that welfare fraud money from Minnesota may have been transferred through these networks, eventually reaching extremist groups such as Al-Shabaab. This idea spread widely online and quickly became a talking point among political influencers. However, it is important to emphasize a crucial fact. There is no publicly confirmed evidence from U.S. authorities showing that Minnesota fraud money has been traced directly to terrorism. Fraud investigations have uncovered individuals sending money overseas, and officials have acknowledged that hawala networks can be exploited by bad actors. But no government agency has verified the more extreme claim that the stolen funds directly financed al-Shabaab operations. Despite this, the idea took hold because it fits a broader narrative some people believe about immigration, national security, and foreign influence. Supporters of Ilhan Omar argue that these claims unfairly target Somali immigrants and dangerously stigmatize an entire community. Critics argue that ignoring the possibility of foreign misuse is irresponsible and that any connection, even indirect, deserves thorough investigation. At this stage, remittances remain a topic of debate rather than established wrongdoing. The reality is more complex than the online narratives suggest. Remittances serve as lifelines for families, but they can also raise questions about oversight and potential vulnerabilities. Understanding this nuance is essential to having an informed discussion about the issue. As the political debate intensified, a new line of discussion emerged online concerning Ilhan Omar's family history in Somalia. Some commentators claim that her family belonged to a governing clan or political faction that was overthrown during Somalia's civil conflict. According to these claims, the family fled not because they were persecuted, but because they were part of a ruling group facing consequences. These allegations, which circulated on social media and commentary videos, suggest that the Omar family was connected to a Marxist Islamist government and left Somalia when that government collapsed. Critics use this narrative to argue that Omar has an ideological connection to authoritarian political systems, and they link her policy positions to this alleged history. However, these claims remain widely disputed and lack clear documented evidence. Official immigration records do not describe her family in political terms, and Omar has not corroborated these claims. She has consistently described her family as refugees who fled civil war, violence, and instability. The conversation about her background underscores how political identity can become intertwined with personal history. For some voters, a politician's origin story shapes how they interpret that politician's actions. For others, digging into disputed or unverifiable historical claims is inappropriate and distracts from factual issues. Regardless of the truth of these claims, they have contributed to the polarized environment surrounding Omar. Her critics portray her as untrustworthy or ideologically opposed to American values. Her supporters argue that these personal attacks are rooted in misinformation, xenophobia, or deep-seated bias against Muslim immigrants. This dynamic illustrates how political debates often evolve beyond policy and into personal narratives. In this case, Omar's identity as a Somali-born immigrant has become inseparable from the broader debate about immigration and fraud, whether fairly or unfairly. The discussion also highlights how the internet can amplify unverified claims, especially when they match pre-existing political beliefs. As the public continues searching for answers, understanding the difference between evidence-based reporting and speculative commentary becomes more important than ever. The controversy surrounding Omar and the Minnesota fraud cases has sparked a wider national conversation about assimilation and immigrant identity. Many Americans with immigrant backgrounds feel strongly connected to both their heritage and their adopted country. Others believe that assimilation should mean adopting American customs, values, and priorities fully, with minimal ties to one's country of origin. These differing perspectives became especially visible in Minnesota. Some residents expressed frustration over the perception that certain immigrant communities retain strong cultural or political ties to their home countries. Others argued that immigration strengthens America by adding cultural diversity and entrepreneurial energy. Remittances, money sent back home, became part of this larger debate. While critics say that sending money abroad prevents economic integration, supporters argue that helping family members overseas is a moral duty and a common global practice. The concept of assimilation itself is deeply debated. Historically, the United States has been described as a melting pot, where cultures blend into a shared identity. More recently, the country has been described as a salad bowl, where distinct cultures coexist while contributing to a larger whole. Some people worry that communities who maintain strong connections to their heritage may not fully embrace American identity. Others believe that cultural preservation and patriotism are not mutually exclusive. The Minnesota situation intensified these conversations because fraud allegations involved individuals from a specific immigrant group. Critics argued this reflected cultural attitudes. Supporters countered that fraud occurs in all communities and that immigration status is irrelevant to criminal behavior. Ilhan Omar herself often speaks about her love for America and the opportunities it provided her family. Her critics argue that her policy positions show the opposite. This contrast demonstrates how personal stories, political beliefs, and cultural background can shape how public figures are perceived. Ultimately, this debate touches on fundamental questions. What does it mean to be American? How do we balance cultural identity with national identity? And how should the country respond when criminal cases involve members of immigrant communities? These questions have no simple answers, but they continue to influence how people interpret events far beyond Minnesota. The rise of social media has dramatically transformed how these stories spread. Claims about fraud, remittances, and political motives were shared thousands of times across platforms like X, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Videos that combine commentary, speculation, and emotional language tend to perform well, meaning they reach large audiences quickly, often before official investigators release statements. In this environment, sensational headlines can overshadow verified information. A dramatic online claim can go viral even if it lacks evidence. In the case of the Minnesota investigations, many videos framed the situation as a sign of a takeover, collapse, or invasion, language that triggers strong emotional responses. Traditional news outlets reported on the fraud cases, but online influencers added layers of commentary that shaped how different communities interpreted the events. Some online voices argued that the fraud cases proved systemic corruption. Others used the story to discuss broader political concerns such as national security or immigration policy. Meanwhile, fact-checkers and analysts emphasized that the connection between Minnesota fraud funds and terrorism remains unproven. Still, once a narrative catches fire online, it becomes difficult to correct misconceptions. This digital environment contributed to the heightened tension between Ilhan Omar and Donald Trump. Each of their statements was amplified online, with supporters framing these exchanges either as bold truth-telling or as harmful misinformation. The Minnesota Somali community also felt the impact. Many expressed concern that they were being unfairly stereotyped because of the actions of a few individuals. Community leaders encouraged dialogue and transparency, while reminding the public that most Somali-Americans are hard-working, law-abiding residents. This situation underscores the double-edged nature of modern media. It empowers citizens to speak out and share information, but it can also magnify division and spread unverified claims. Understanding how media ecosystems shape public perception is essential for anyone seeking the truth behind complex issues. Let's summarize what has been verified by official sources, what is alleged but not proven, and what remains unclear. Verified by authorities. Minnesota has experienced several large-scale fraud schemes involving Feeding Our Future, child nutrition fraud, housing stabilization services, Medicaid-funded autism services. More than 70 people have been charged in the meal program case alone. Fraudulent billing in autism services increased sharply within a few years. State officials acknowledged oversight failures and took steps to tighten regulations. These are established facts supported by charges, court documents, and state reports, partially verified or under investigation. Some defendants are Somali-American. Some individuals did send money overseas. Hawala-style money transfer systems can be vulnerable to misuse. These statements are consistent with reporting, but do not prove any intentional wrongdoing beyond the fraud cases. Not verified. There is no publicly confirmed evidence showing that fraud money has reached al-Shabaab or any extremist group. There is no evidence supporting the idea of a coordinated effort by the Somali community to exploit welfare systems. Claims about population takeover or deliberate political strategies are speculation, not documented facts. Understanding these distinctions helps prevent misinformation and allows the public to base their opinions on reality rather than rumor. Fraud must be taken seriously, but it must also be approached with fairness and precision. The fraud cases have caused widespread concern, and rightly so. But the broader narrative involving terrorism links remains speculative and should be treated carefully. Ultimately, ongoing investigations will reveal more details. Until then, it's important to rely on credible sources and avoid conclusions that go beyond what has been verified. The situation in Minnesota highlights broader political and social themes that extend far beyond a single state. Fraud within public programs affects taxpayers, public trust, and confidence in government oversight. When fraud cases involve members of immigrant communities, the political stakes become even higher. This controversy has brought three major issues to the forefront. 1. Immigration policy. Trump's response reflects a political platform focused on stricter immigration enforcement and reduced refugee intake. His supporters see the fraud cases as justification for tougher policies. Opponents view his comments as unfair generalizations that undermine immigrant contributions. 2. National security. Claims about terrorism, even if unverified, influence public opinion and create pressure for increased surveillance and oversight of money transfers. Security analysts caution that while vigilance is necessary, unfounded accusations can harm community relations and discourage cooperation with law enforcement. 3. Community relations. The Somali-American community in Minnesota has expressed concerns about being unfairly targeted. Community leaders emphasize the importance of distinguishing between criminals and law-abiding residents. This conversation mirrors tensions seen in other immigrant communities across U.S. history. The political divide surrounding this issue reflects the country's broader polarization. For some Americans, this story reinforces fears about foreign influence or cultural change. For others, it demonstrates how minority communities are often blamed collectively for individual wrongdoing. Regardless of perspective, it is clear that the Minnesota fraud cases have become more than a legal issue. They have evolved into a national conversation about identity, trust, and the evolving meaning of American citizenship. As this story continues, it's important to recognize the role of due process and the responsibility of the public to distinguish between verified facts and speculation. Fraud investigations can take months or even years to fully uncover. Charges must be proven in court, and defendants are entitled to legal representation and a fair trial. Jumping to conclusions before evidence is presented not only harms individuals, but can also distort public understanding. Media outlets and influencers share a responsibility as well. Sensational claims may attract attention, but they can also spread misinformation and inflame tensions. In the case of the Minnesota allegations, many dramatic claims circulated long before investigators released official findings. Citizens who want to stay informed should prioritize credible, evidence-based reporting. Government documents, court filings, and statements from investigators provide the most reliable information. Speculation, regardless of how confidently it is presented, should always be approached with caution. It is also important to consider the broader impact of public discourse. When entire communities are blamed for the actions of individuals, it can create fear, resentment, and division. On the other hand, refusing to acknowledge wrongdoing because of political loyalty or fear of controversy can undermine accountability. A responsible public response requires two things: fairness toward individuals and communities, and seriousness about the fraud cases and their financial impact. The truth often lies somewhere between online extremes. By remaining thoughtful, patient, and informed, the public can support justice while avoiding unnecessary conflict. As we conclude this extended report, Let's summarize the key points objectively. Minnesota has faced several significant fraud cases involving social service programs, with hundreds of millions of dollars improperly claimed or stolen. These cases have prompted strong reactions from political leaders, including Ilhan Omar and Donald Trump, each framing the situation in ways that reflect their broader political beliefs. Some of the individuals charged in these cases are members of the Somali-American community, which has added cultural and political sensitivity to the story. However, fraud was committed by individuals, not by entire communities, and investigators have not made any statements supporting collective blame. Claims that fraud money was used to finance terrorism remain unverified. While money transfer systems in East Africa have vulnerabilities, no evidence has been publicly presented that connects Minnesota welfare funds directly to extremist organizations. This controversy has sparked broader conversations about immigration, assimilation, remittances, national security, and media influence. It reveals deep divisions in American society, but also reinforces the importance of due process, factual reporting, and informed public discussion. As investigations continue, more details will emerge. For now, the most important step is maintaining clarity, fairness, and a commitment to truth. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth, balanced report.